Hello, everyone. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Sandy.
Welcome to In Sarah's Tent. And as always, we have the flaps to the tent open for hospitality. We have the candle lighted in the tent, as Sarah's tent always had a candle burning in it. So I think we're ready to begin our reading tonight. And Nancy, if you would like to start, and then we'll have some discussion.
Great. Yeah. So we're going to be continuing from week to week. We just are reading straight through, no specific amount of verses for each time. So tonight we're going to be reading chapter 3, verse 22, 23, and 24, and that'll end out chapter 3. So 22. And Hashem God said, "Indeed, man has become like the unique one among us, to know good and bad. And now, lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life, and he will eat and live forever." So Hashem God expelled him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground which he was taken from. And having driven out the man, he stationed to the east of the Garden of Eden the cherubim and the blade of the sword that was ever turning to guard the way to the tree of life.
Hey, thank you, Nancy. And this is kind of a continuation of what we talked about last week, consequences to actions. So this was, we talked last week about the consequences for the serpent, for the woman, the man, and now the final consequence of their action. There's a phrase in verse 22 that intrigues me and makes me think back to Genesis 1:1. Verse 22, he says, the man will become like one of us, like one among us. So who is the us in that? It makes me think back to Genesis 1:1, where Hashem said, "Let us make man." Or not Genesis 1:1, but in the first chapter of Genesis. So is that the same us that's referred to back at the beginning? Who is the man among?
I have heard that the the us back when "Let us make man" was God talking to angels, and if it's the same us here, then God would be including angels in that he's going to be unique. And a human is unique compared to Hashem God and the angels.
Yes.
Man is unique from them.
Yes, in humans can now distinguish between the good and the bad. Animals don't have that ability. They just act on instinct. They do what they were created to do. But now man has to make those choices every moment of every day to choose the good or choose the bad. So I think it's just interesting. If we look in the Hebrew word, it says has become like echad, like one among us. And then the translators have added like the unique one. So I think it's just, it's always a challenge when we run across that phrase where Hashem refers to himself in the plural. It kind of gives us a moment to stop and think, well, who is us?
Right,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. Something for us to think about there. So in this verse, Hashem says, he will take from the tree of life, also from the tree of life, and he will eat and live forever. Back when man was first put in the garden, Nancy, he was told he could eat from every tree except the one. So does that mean, do you think that means he was already eating from the tree of life before he sinned?
I don't think so. No, not from this verse, because it says lest. like we want, God Hashem is saying, we don't want him to eat from the tree of life. So we need to send him out of the garden lest he does eat from the tree of life.
Right. But I'm going to push back a little bit on that. Before, he was still in his perfect state. So what would have been the problem, him eating from the tree of life? Now, at this point, it seems like he can't eat from the tree of life, that it's tied to the fact that he has eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So I guess my question was, before he ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, was he eating from the tree of life?
He could have.
Okay.
And I have heard some rabbis say that if he had eaten from the tree of life first, then he could have eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Oh, okay.
Because the punishment for eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was death. But if he ate from the tree of life first, then he wouldn't die. I don't have that in any um, commentary that I can quote from. I just remember one of the
Right.
rabbis saying that.
Right. Yeah. It's just, as we've said almost every week, there's just so much in these verses to challenge us and look at. When was he eating? Was he eating from the tree of life? Was he not? Um, but it's definitely in this verse, we get the idea that it's not a good thing now for him to eat from the tree of life, that Hashem is not going to allow that to happen.
Right. Things have changed now.
Exactly. The other thing, Nancy, that I saw in this verse 22, and then I'd like more of your thoughts on it. Um, they were told at the at the first, when you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you will die. But we've talked about they didn't die in that moment. But right now, where they are going to be expelled, they can't eat from the tree of life. Is this where we see death actually entering in to our world? Does death mean loss of access to the tree of life? I guess I'm trying to ask, how do we define death?
I think that's a very deep question. I think that people, even today, doctors try to define what is the moment of death. But I think I understand what you're saying. They didn't, it wasn't like a poison where they ate it and then went and keeled over
Right,
dead, you know.
right, right.
It was something that changed their fundamental essence to where they could die.
Yes, and if we look at death as a separation, then they're separated from the degree of closeness that they had with Hashem before. There's now a separation there. He still loves them. He's still taking care of them, but it seems like it's not quite the same. That very intimate relationship they had with him originally in the garden is now separated. And is that a form of death? If we just look at death as separation.
Separation, yeah. Yeah, I guess that could be um, one of the forms of death is to be separated from Hashem. Yeah, being
Yeah,
kicked out of the garden and separated.
separated. Not that they
Separated
didn't
from
have
the
a
closeness.
yes,
Separated from the closeness. Yeah,
yes. We'll as we go on, we know that they still had a relationship with him. He even was still had a relationship with them while they were still in the garden. Like, we talked about he clothed them and all of that. So maybe he withdrew or concealed some of himself from them. It's not quite the same. It's just not
right,
the same now.
right.
Did you have any other thing that jumped out at you on verse 22? that we like to talk about?
Well, I'm just going to mention this. I don't have any deep discussion on this, but we have talked about this before. The tree of life, the Torah is often called the tree of life.
Right.
And so here, it looks to me like the tree of life was available and readily accessible, and now it's going to take a little bit more effort
Ah,
to obtain the tree of life. I don't know. It it's there several times that the tree of life is the Torah, and I just wonder if it's the same tree of life.
good question. Good question. Again, a deep subject. And as you were talking about that, it made me think they had, before they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, like you said, they had the option, I guess, to eat from the tree of life. Now, was the tree of life not accessible to them until God brought it down at Sinai and he brought it back among people, brought it back down? I don't know. That may be too off the rails, if you want to say that. I don't know. But maybe he withdrew it and then at Sinai it became accessible again.
Yeah, that
I don't
that
know.
fits. That fits. Yeah.
Maybe we should run some of this before Rabbi Wolbe, before we say, are we
Just
too far? Are we too far off the grid here?
yeah, just a disclaimer. Some of this is just our own thinking out loud. So
Yes. Just two
we'll let you know
friends,
if we have a quote or something. Yeah.
two friends speculating. So,
Right.
okay. And verse 23, I think is a very sad verse. They are expelled from the garden. What thoughts did you have on that?
Well, I thought it was very interesting that it says that Hashem God expelled him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground which he was taken from.
Mm-hmm.
So if you remember in the creation story, Hashem made Adam and then placed him in the Garden of Eden. So the ground that he was made of is outside the garden.
Right.
And then he was placed in the garden. And now he's being expelled back out of the garden to that same ground
Oh,
where he
interesting.
was originally created from.
Interesting. I like that a lot. And you made me think, we talked about how he placed him in the garden, didn't just throw him in the garden, he gently placed him in the garden. And this word expelled is translated in our Humash as expelled, but if you look at the Hebrew word, it's actually shlach, to send. So when I was reading that word expelled, that sounds harsh. You're
Yes.
forced out. But if we carry through the idea of how he gently placed him in the garden, and if we use the word shalach, that's actually here in the Hebrew, to send, he sent them out. That sounds gentler to me rather
Yes.
than expel. And so to me, that kind of ties those two thoughts together. He gently placed him in there, but then when it came time to leave, he didn't just kick him out, he sent him out.
That's
So,
a good catch. Yes. And again, that's a good reason to look at the original Hebrew and not
yeah.
necessarily rely on the translations.
Exactly. Like that. Yeah. It just, to me, it just continues the idea that Hashem is showing his kindness to them. The
Absolutely.
word, like I said, the word expel just sounded harsh. You had some interesting thoughts on verse 24 about the cherubim. You want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, the well, the word here is kruvim, And it's the same word that is used to describe the figures of the angels that are on top of the Ark of the Covenant.
Mm-hmm.
The the description of the two angels, the two sets of Kruvim, seem to me to be different, but I don't have a depth of knowledge about this particular Kruvim. But I just thought it was interesting. It's the same word.
Exactly. And I thought of that too, that is there a connection? It says they were placed to guard the tree, guard the way to the tree of life. And I don't know if the cherubim that are placed on the cover over the ark, are they guarding it also? Do we see it? Is there any kind of connection there that they were guarding the tree of life and they are guarding the ark? And tying back the Torah to the tree of life, we know the tablets were in the ark. So maybe here again, just two friends chatting. There might be a connection there that the cherubim guard the Torah / tree of life, wherever it is.
Right. In both places here.
In both places.
Yes.
Exactly. Now, I have read some commentary that think where it says it was just a sword, a flaming sword. But this, reading it, it sounds like there were cherubim that had a flaming sword that turned, rotated, I guess would be the word to use, ever turning. So, and isn't the word for sword very similar to the word for cherubim? Or am I not remembering that correctly?
They sound the same, but it's a chet as opposed to a kaf.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But yes, it sounds very much the
Yes.
same.
Yes. Okay. And I read in the commentary that they were destructive angels, but I don't get that necessarily from reading the verse here, that I don't associate something protecting something as being also destructive.
Maybe because they had swords.
Oh, could be. Yeah. They had the swords. Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't destroying anything, but they were protecting against somebody coming back in, and maybe they would have destroyed somebody who tried. I don't know. That's
Could
just a
be.
guess.
Yeah. Could be. Again, I think these three verses are sad, very
I
sad.
Yes.
Um, we've seen some positive things in it, how Hashem still loved them, still cared for them. But to think you are in this, like we learned at the very beginning that the Garden of Eden means pleasure. They were in this incredible place, and now they are out in I guess maybe to some degree a harsh world where they're going to have to work and all of that. So anything else? I think you had something you wanted to talk about Rashi, or did you have something else on these verses?
Um, well, I thought you were going to bring up something about uh, consequences don't come immediately.
Well, yeah, that was going to be my takeaway from it. So yeah, we can do that now. I had two takeaways from this. Um, that sometimes the consequences of my actions are immediate. Like this was fairly immediate with Adam and Chava. It doesn't seem to be that there was a delay in their being expelled. It all seems to happen rather rapidly. But sometimes the consequences are not immediately apparent to us. I'm wondering if our consequences were more immediate, would that have more of a deterrent effect on us? Or when consequences are delayed, do we have the idea, oh, I got away with something? You know, so that was just one takeaway. Sometimes consequences are immediate, and sometimes it may be a while before we see it. And one other takeaway is we talked earlier about death, that it's a separation. We see they were separated from the garden. They were separated from the tree of life. And then for us, death would be a separation of our soul and our body. So that was kind of a couple of things I took away from these few verses.
Very nice. Yes. I agree. This is a very sad ending. And I did want to add just a little bit of something that I was studying earlier. It kind of goes back to the what they actually did. And what I was listening to one of the rabbis talking about was the the prohibition was not necessarily you shouldn't know the difference between good and evil. The prohibition was, or the thing that they had to accomplish was self-control.
Oh, yeah.
And it kind of flipped everything for me, like, oh, okay. So maybe if they had had self-control and not eaten from the wrong tree, eaten from all of the other trees that they had access to, except this one, if they had had self-control, then maybe eventually they would have been allowed to eat from that one
Mm.
and not
Okay.
been kicked out and had
Okay.
all of that knowledge. But he was saying that that it wasn't that Hashem didn't want Adam and Hava to know good and evil. It was just to teach them self-control.
Oh, that's good.
Kind of an interesting twist on that.
It is. It is. It's just, just not at all what over the years I had been taught from these verses. Just not at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So yes, I have some
Rashi.
notes on Rashi.
Yeah.
So sometimes you might hear us refer to Rashi said this, or this is a quote from Rashi, and you're like, okay, well, who is that? I don't know who that is. Well, Rashi is an acronym. It's Resh Shin Yud, and it stands for Rabbeinu Shlomo ben Yitzhak, which means our teacher Solomon, son of Yitzhak. Instead of saying the whole name, many of our great sages just have these acronyms as names. So Rashi is a very common commentator. He lived in France in the 11th century from 1040 to 1105, and he was a commentator on the Torah and the Talmud. His commentary is the most widely read biblical commentary. And he said his aim was to clarify the plain sense of the meaning of each verse.
Mm.
So, a commentary in a simple language that makes it easy for everyone to learn and understand Torah. And that's why we often refer to Rashi, because he usually will probably ask a question, well, I wonder what that means, or I don't understand that part, and we'll read Rashi and he has answered it for us. He kind of
Yeah.
like mind reads. He knows
Yeah.
exactly what we need to know.
Yeah. And it's kind of encouraging to know we are asking the same questions that this incredible a rabbi asked. Yeah, maybe
Yes.
we're thinking along those lines. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
good. I think I don't know who wrote the book. I haven't read it, but I've heard of it. It's called What's Troubling Rashi, and I
Oh,
think
that
that might
sounds
be an
interesting.
interesting book to find. Maybe by next week we can find out who wrote it and where it's available. What's troubling Rashi? So Okay, Nancy, I think this may be a little shorter tonight. We wanted to stop at the end of this chapter and kind of a teaser for next week. We bring in a who done it, but actually we know who done it. There is a murder coming up.
Yes, the first
So,
murder.
the first murder, absolutely. So, any final thoughts before we say goodnight?
I'm looking forward to doing next week's episode. I think it will be very, very interesting. Come and join us then
Absolutely. Join us in Sarah's tent.
in Sarah's tent.
Good night.
Good night.